Good afternoon, everybody. This is a live severe weather briefing as we have 2 days of severe weather threat to discuss this afternoon and evening across northeastern, maybe eastern Wyoming, into southeastern Montana, possibly into western South Dakota as well. Higher base storms. Looking at the surface map, we've got dew points only in the 50s, low 50s into the target area. Rather than the other day when we had the enhanced risk over the high plains, we were waking up to mid-60s in a post-frontal environment, northerly winds that flipped around to an easterly direction. So this setup does look like a more of a high base severe weather setup today, maybe a windbag type of event across the high plains. This is the high plains insanity target. A couple of plumes of 0 to 3 kilometer shear and moisture streaming up the terrain, up into southeastern Montana, northeastern Wyoming. The Billings area would be a good spot to set up. Billings down to Gillette. Maybe another pipe that could set up for the Nebraska Panhandle into southeastern Wyoming that would suggest more of a chug water type of an impact. But when you do look at the surface map, the moisture does look a lot more marginal than it did before. And then we've got this setup that we've been analyzing across the Midwest, across portions of Iowa, southern Minnesota. Looks like a more messy setup now in the models, trending a lot more messy at least. And a morning complex of storms impedes the lift of that warm frontal zone. Instead of lifting it up into central and southern Minnesota, like we saw in the previous days with a more intense wave, we have a flatter short wave now that's a little bit more rapid, and it does fire a complex of storms in Iowa tomorrow morning, Wednesday morning. It looks like it is going to impede the advancement of this warm front, keeping it into northern Iowa with slightly less favorable kinematics out there. But it is, overall, this event, even though it does have a messy evolution, it does have a higher upside in terms of the wind shear and the instability. I'm not sure whether storms are going to fire a little bit further east than we might think across northeastern Iowa into southwestern Wisconsin. It does look like an afternoon mode develops into western Iowa. That could evolve as well. But it is a volatile setup, changing a lot in the models, complexes of storms to resolve. But that's just kind of the game that you play across the upper Midwest and the Corn Belt when chasing. And if you're out there and things come together at the last second, then you're likely going to see tornadoes. But so far today, here is the morning surface map across the high plains. And look at these dew points. You get low to mid 50s out here, even a 48 up there along the western edge of the Black Hills. Billings, you do have a northerly wind there, but a 45 dew point. Sheridan's got a 51 here. So you're not seeing those mid 60s dew points that we saw over the Nebraska Panhandle in that post-frontal environment with northerly winds that had a delayed shift over to an easterly direction by the afternoon, and then those storms developed in that environment. Perfect timing with that post-frontal environment. This one, though, is a little bit different. You do have easterly winds in the morning so far, but you've already got these southeasterlies with rip and moisture transport into eastern Wyoming. The 3 kilometer NAM is showing mid-50s dew points. That's the best case scenario out here, and it does have that plume of mid-50s dew points surging up toward the Billings area late. Looks like a late afternoon and evening type of a setup. I'd likely target the Gillette area out toward Sundance as well in northeastern Wyoming, maybe even a little bit further north, and you could play that Billings to Broadus type of a corridor. But it definitely is more of a structure day, more of a windbag, high-based, big-time evaporational cooling below relatively high cloud bases. That'll have a tendency to become outflow dominant and be those large complexes of storms that will move east across the high plains just ahead of that jet streak and eventually moving into the Black Hills during the evening. I was just talking to some of my friends out there in the Black Hills. I know there's a big concert coming up Wednesday night there in downtown Deadwood. It looks like that trough's going to be well off to the east into Minnesota and Iowa during the day tomorrow, so it should be relatively clear across the Black Hills on Wednesday night. But we'll analyze the models in detail and see if there's any precipitation or disruptive weather that could impact that concert up there in the Black Hills. But today I think you got to get up into this environment up here. Even though the models do show some of these upper 50s dew points getting transported into southeastern Wyoming, Chugwater, even up toward a Lusk type of a target would be a southern mode backdoor target. But I think that there's going to be quite a bit of mixing that's going to counteract a lot of the transport of those upper 50s dew points into the high plains. You really want to see 60s dew points when you wake up in the morning when you're about to chase a high plains setup, and it just is screaming high bases out here this morning looking at this surface map. You do have this little pocket though, some upper 50s, and then you finally do find some mid 60s dew points down there near McCook and into northwestern Kansas, but I just don't think that those dew points are going to be very tapped very efficiently with this late arriving short wave, relatively low amplitude upper system as well. And then tomorrow, most of the models are showing a messy evolution. We saw some hints at this when we were looking at the 3-kilometer dam in yesterday's models, showing this complex of storms that forms in Iowa and then propagating along and slowing the advance of that warm front. If we have a clean evolution of this system and you have a pretty strong upper level trough, then you'd have a bit stronger of an elevated mix layer, less of a tendency to form those early into morning, into early afternoon complexes of storms that can slow the lifting of that warm front. But first, let's take a look at the evolution of this wave. And it does look like by 20Z, you have a very unstable environment here across central into northern Iowa. The best kinematics are a little bit off to the north across central and southern Minnesota, but you do have a flatter, further south, faster moving upper level system than we saw in yesterday's forecast models that showed a much more clean warm sector evolution, but we're definitely trending toward a flatter, faster wave that actually fires a complex of storms as well during the early morning hours. This is the 500 millibar map here. And you can see a flatter wave, a bit more of a positive tilt with a bit of a preceding jet streak. And this is at 20Z, so at 2 p.m., this is just a little bit too fast for this upper level wave. The timing isn't quite favorable relative to peak heating. If this wave were a little bit deeper, slower moving, later arriving relative to peak heating, and less likely to form this complex of storms in the late morning hours into the early afternoon, then I would think that this would be a pretty substantial setup. Make sure I'm live here, guys. Yep, looks like I'm live. Good morning, everybody. Hopefully this thing is still working. Yep, looks like it should be. So these are, this is the wave today, and it's a much flatter wave than it was before, but still this is a relatively potent shortwave trough ejecting across central and eastern Montana, finally arriving into northeastern Wyoming by the late evening hours, and you can see this little pocket of relatively calm 500 millibar winds. I think that's going to prevent those isolated supercells from developing, and you're really just going to get a windbag event that forms right along the leading edge of this jet streak from southeastern Montana down toward the Sheridan area. There is a little bit of a jet streak that peels off from the southern area, the southern ribbon, that could initiate some storms down Chugwater area, maybe Douglas to Chugwater. That does look like a pocket of about 30 knots there, ejecting over top those southeasterly winds at 10 knots. So there is about 30 to 40 knots of bulk shear that would be supportive of some supercell storms in that southern mode. But the best kinematics by far are across southeastern Montana into northeastern Wyoming there. Looking for that cyclonic curvature, but even early on, this system has a bit of a positive tilt with that jet streak preceding it a bit, instead of the flow being on the backside of the system, causing that wave to deepen on approach to the Midwest, and a slower arrival of that wave would be much more favorable. But these ridge runners are complicated. This is the game that you play across the Midwest. You get those morning complexes of storms, and then does it destabilize in time? Is there going to be subsidence behind that lead wave that's going to lead to a total cap bust across Iowa? And that's why Iowa is just a difficult place to play. But here's that wave. It's a flatter wave. There's a little bit of ridging downstream, but really it has all that flow along the front edge of it, and it even gets more positively tilted with time on approach. And this strong mid-level flow arrives in northwestern Iowa and in Minnesota by late morning. This is 16Z here. So this is about 11 a.m. Out here, late morning hours, and this is when that complex of storms gets fired up there, and that complex is going to keep that warm front down into central northern Iowa instead of southern Minnesota, where if it was a deeper wave, that would be much more favorable for a big tornado threat. But you can see the early arrival of this flatter upper level system than the models are indicating tomorrow. And you can see it fires this massive mega complex of storms across northern Iowa, and that leads to a very messy evolution here across northern Iowa, really preventing that warm front or that warm sector from moving up into southern Minnesota. But it's a totally different shape to the upper level wave here, and there could be enough flow behind this. You know how Iowa operates. Sometimes it can destabilize and you can get a mesoscale accident along that outflow boundary there. But it basically brings a bow echo by midday into the La Crosse area, into southwestern Wisconsin, really clearing out northern Iowa in terms of that instability. And you can definitely see it in the dew points. Look at the dryness here carved out by that lead disturbance there, that lead bow echo that at this time by midday, 1 p.m. or so, is moving into southwestern Wisconsin. This dry air is really going to prevent that warm front from lifting off to the north. And you do get a bit of a reinvigoration back behind it, 30, 35 knots out of the southwest of the low-level jet. There is a chance that it could still destabilize along that outflow boundary, and then you could get a mesoscale accident later on in the afternoon. But by 21Z, the low-level jet ejects into northeastern Iowa, a little bit closer to that complex of storms, and then across northwestern Iowa, you definitely get a weakening of the 850 winds, about 10 to 15 knots out there across northwestern Iowa. A ribbon of some stronger flow across southeastern Minnesota within that stable air. But with the ejection of that shear off to the northeast, along with that MCS, instead of a reinvigoration of that low-level jet, that's going to really prevent that warm front from lifting off to the north. But you do get a reinvigoration of that low-level jet across western Iowa. There, central western Iowa around 0Z. So there is a chance that if you can get a second round of storms to develop in the vicinity of that outflow boundary or reinforced warm front, that there could be some tornado warnings within this complex of storms, especially late as that low-level jet increases. So at about 5 p.m., it does look like another round of storms is going to develop across western Iowa. The threat of whether these are going to be supercells is definitely up in the air. Looks like quite a messy evolution here. The lead complex is now approaching central Lake Michigan and eastern Wisconsin there, leaving behind it a wake of relatively stabilized air across northeastern Iowa into southwestern Wisconsin, southeastern Minnesota. And then the next round develops, and the models do have a tendency to ramp up that low-level jet into this complex of storms. So the 3-kilometer NAM looks like this is going to be more MCS formation, driven by that reinvigoration of that low-level jet. But then you get another complex here forming across central and northern Iowa. Looks like more of a rainmaker up there, honestly. Probably some severe thunderstorm warnings as well. A lot of rain, though, falling here across Iowa, central and northern Iowa. Definitely a big rainmaker into southwestern Wisconsin. Likely going to be some pretty substantial flooding up here, too, with this after round of heavy rain lifting up through the target area. Gravity waves in here as this thing stabilizes a bit. Plenty of moisture feeding that complex of storms into the early morning hours on Thursday. Low-level jet also fuels that storm. Deep layer shear will keep the convection upright along this complex of storms and will sustain it in the overnight hours. And eventually it does approach southeastern Wisconsin by about midnight. Northern Illinois as well. Even southern lower Michigan could get in on these complexes of storms, definitely, but it definitely weakens here by the early morning hours on Thursday. Some sustenance of the complex of storms into central and eastern Iowa during the day tomorrow. But boy, is this definitely taken a step backwards, this severe weather event, due to a flatter upper level wave, early arrival, but still looks like an impactful couple of days of severe weather. Look at this complex of storms that arrives with the arrival of that upper level energy. This is the morning hours. Big time complex of storms, northeastern Nebraska into northwestern Iowa, and that's going to act to definitely stabilize the atmosphere, disrupt the atmosphere quite a bit. Let's take a closer look at today, High Plains Insanity. And the 3-kilometer NAM does fire some storms on that southern pipe of moisture into southeastern Wyoming. You can see even a 57 dew point there near the Chugwater area to the north of Cheyenne. You get another decent pipe of moisture streaming into the south of the Black Hills into northeastern Wyoming. This is this afternoon. Some of these higher dew points are due to precipitation and storms firing off the mountains there near Sheridan, southwest of Billings. The moisture tongue seems to stay just to the south of that Billings to Broadus line. So just to the south of there, a little bit closer to the Wyoming border is where that moisture wants to reside. You can see some of the dew points here in northeastern Wyoming, even by 23Z, 53, 54 out there. This is a 12Z, 3-kilometer NAM. And I bet the HRRR mixes the hell out of these dew points across the high plains. Still, it has this tongue of 50 dew points, though, feeding up into those storms to the west of Gillette, arriving in Gillette at about 5 or 6 p.m. Likely windbag, mega shelf there approaching Gillette in northeastern Wyoming with this event. Definitely mixes out these southern dew points. The HRRR has dew points in the low to mid 40s in southeastern Wyoming, basically under forecasting them by about 6 or 7 degrees, at least compared to the 3-kilometer NAM. But you can still use the HRRR to diagnose where these pipes of 0 to 3 kilometers shear and moisture are going to reside. And definitely the dominant one here, going just to the south of the Black Hills into northeastern Wyoming. Storm chaser friend of mine, Adam Lucio, was posting pictures of some smoke plumes out there from near Devil's Tower, and even some aerial support trying to battle that wildfire. Definitely concerning, because when I was up there, you just realize how dry it is across the Dakotas and the northern high plains after about 10% of the seasonal snowfall this past winter. Definitely, and it's such an area that's so dependent on that soil moisture recharge during the winter months from those big winter storms across the northern high plains. Just didn't have it this winter. Didn't have much in the way of spring and summer precipitation either. Whereas eastern Colorado is kind of an oasis. Everything's really green down here east of the Continental Divide, because ever since that big winter storm, spring snowstorm, March 13th through the 15th, we have had quite a bit of monsoon precipitation, quite a bit of spring and summer precipitation, only in eastern Colorado, but off to the north, eastern Montana, eastern Wyoming, and the Dakotas, bone dry up there. So you definitely want these storms to produce as much rainfall as possible across the northern high plains. And the HRRR, once again, is likely right for the wrong reasons, showing this pretty substantial windbag moving into northeastern Wyoming. This is at 23Z, about 5 p.m. Mountain Time, and that windbag slides off to the southeast. Likely a dramatic shelf cloud expected down here. The HRRR still has a couple isolated storms developing closer to the Chugwater area, where there likely is going to be about 6 or 7 degrees Fahrenheit higher surface dew points. Not quite as high base as they could be down there, but definitely showing a windbag that approaches the Black Hills by late night tonight and this evening. Just a textbook, a good rainmaker down here for the Black Hills too, as that complex of storms, that windbag slams into the higher terrain and should squeeze out a little bit of moisture that they could have. So it does look like some much needed rainfall coming from the Black Hills there, and that will continue through the early morning hours on Wednesday before it slides off to the east. Probably a beautiful pink sunrise out there in the Deadwood area behind that MCS. And instead of a new MCS forming in northwest Iowa, the models actually show this thing continuing. A mega bow echo arriving in Sioux City by tomorrow morning. And that's going to be the main disruptor for tomorrow's event, as that MCS just cruises across northern Iowa. Might even be able to call this a derecho, except I'm not sure if it's going to have much wind damage across the state of South Dakota during the late night, early morning hours on Wednesday. But it does reinvigorate when it hits that pool of moisture across the Corn Belt. But definitely does disrupt the tornado threat. The HRRR definitely is in agreement with the high-resolution NAM. In fact, the HRRR is even stronger with this complex of storms moving into Wisconsin. And then you can see the clear skies back behind this shortwave trough, relatively positively tilted. Looks like a pretty good night for that concert there in Deadwood. My friends down in Deadwood, this is for you. Definitely looks pretty good. The HRRR does reinvigorate convective initiation along that outflow boundary into eastern Iowa, and I do expect there's probably pretty good kinematics out there across the eastern part of Iowa. You can see this low-level jet about 30 to 40 knots feeding those storms. Instability is going to be a question mark with that lead complex of storms so close by, but it does look like there is a chance of some reinvigoration of that environment and some destabilization in the outflow boundary behind that complex of storms. Maybe central eastern Iowa looks interesting. The 3-kilometer NAM, meanwhile, reinvigorates a low-level jet and develops that complex of storms into central and western Iowa. But the HRRR is even more progressive, has a stronger complex of storms, but it does show some reinvigoration of the atmosphere along that outflow boundary in eastern Iowa. Decent hodograph shape, too. Decent instability. South-southwest winds at the surface, about 84/72 there in eastern Iowa, recovering quite nicely. All beneath a 50 to 60 knot mid and upper tropospheric jet there, and resulting in quite a nice shape in the hodograph. So if you can get some surface-based instability developing along an outflow boundary there in central and eastern Iowa, then I could see a couple of tornado warnings getting squeezed out of these cells, maybe some transient supercell structures across eastern Iowa, building down toward the I-80 corridor by about 7 or 8 p.m. And possible supercell structures within this environment in Iowa. Someone's going to get hammered by big-time rain out here because you have that initial complex of storms, and then that low-level jet develops, big-time convergence nosing into that outflow boundary behind that complex of storms is going to lead to vigorous convective development, if not a couple of tornado warnings there in eastern Iowa. But really, the story today is that this is a flatter, faster upper-level system. Really surging in toward the Wisconsin area by 1Z. Its early arrival also helps maintain that complex of storms from tomorrow morning, surging through the target area. Here you can see that wave that arrives at 12Z, kind of proliferating that complex of storms into northwestern Iowa, southern Minnesota. And really, it's this lead wave right here that messes up the whole entire system. Instead of having a nice consolidated high amplitude upper level trough, you kind of get this weird positively tilted trough axis with a lead wave. The 3-kilometer NAM is more of a consolidated wave, but it's a little bit faster progressive. But this lead wave right here helps proliferate that complex of storms that forms overnight tonight, moves across the Black Hills region, continues into northwestern Iowa and southern Minnesota, and then that really botches up the environment back behind it. And we can certainly watch how it evolves here with this forecast loop. This is the pivotalweather.com site here. And watch how the instability builds out ahead of that wave. Complex of storms, fires, instability, low-level jet helps proliferate that wave all the way into Wisconsin. And it helps impede the recovery back behind it. And then you get another complex of storms along that west to east outflow boundary that becomes a cold front sagging off to the south. Maybe some high plains insanity firing up southeastern Wyoming there toward the end of the period, about 60 hours. Post-frontal environment behind this wave. Let's see how that behaves. Possible Wednesday sleeper setup across southeastern Wyoming also could evolve. So I could see some interesting high plains events. So maybe instead of chasing Iowa, it makes sense to work the high plains, southeastern Wyoming. Doesn't look that great down there, but a couple of cells, northeastern Colorado into southeastern Wyoming tomorrow. Could keep an eye on. Really, it depends on whether I want to head out to chase this messy setup with a high bust potential relative to tornadoes, or do I want to work the high plains this afternoon and tomorrow, northeastern Colorado into southeastern Wyoming there. But definitely does look like a messy setup. We'll call it a volatile setup here across Iowa. I'm going for these flashy thumbs now for these weather briefings because it's what it takes to get eyes on your weather briefings. Learned this from Ryan Hall, y'all, who's been doing the weather briefings as well on YouTube, and he does these flashy images right here. This looks insane. And by volatile, I mean that it's a constantly evolving forecast here, and really a flatter wave leading to that early morning complex of storms that pushes into southwestern Wisconsin And do we have an outflow boundary that destabilizes with the low-level jet pushing through eastern Iowa? That maybe late afternoon could fire. Or is it going to be this new complex of storms that develops across western and central Iowa? To me, it looks like a messy setup in Iowa and Minnesota, southwestern Wisconsin. Flash flood potential seems to be one of the greatest threats with this setup. But I will certainly be keeping an eye on it here and may chase this event, especially if the models go back to what it looked like yesterday. So thank you, everybody, for tuning into my weather reports. Have a great rest of your Tuesday, and I may be live up into northeastern Wyoming late this afternoon for that windbag arrival, especially if dew points start to trend a little bit higher than the models are showing. But looking at that surface map, it looks like it's going to be a high base setup dominated by evaporational cooling below cloud base, mega shelves, ominous looking storms that hopefully will dump a lot of rain in the Black Hills because they certainly need that rainfall up there. So thanks everybody for tuning into my weather report. Have a great rest of your Tuesday. Never stop chasing.